Everybody. In progress. Okay. Got it. Got it. John Barris, I see you're out in the audience. How you feeling?
Still hurting, but trying to get around.
I'm sorry to hear that. So John has some form of sciatica, unfortunately. But then the other thing John told me besides that is you're probably aware there's pending litigation right now, and it's in reference to the offer of compensation. Currently, if you look at the rules and regulations, there's an obligation to offer compensation to the agent who brings the buyer. Now, that's being contested as antitrust, so it's going to be interesting to see where the litigation goes. So John had asked me if we could put on maybe a discussion or presentation to let everybody know about what's taking place. So John, what I have done, I've contacted Jeff Spatana, who's Assistant General Counsel for CRMLS, and he's going to see if he can get Ed Zorn, who's a General Counsel for CRMLS, to address the office. So I'm trying to get that set up for, I think, November 7th, as a matter of fact. I don't have confirmation yet. So Ed Zorn should be much more in tune with everything that's happening. So hopefully we'll get him to come and attend our meeting and talk about what's taking place. It could be big changes for the industry. Not good ones either.
Yeah, thank you.
Your thing. Well, thanks for coming, everybody, today. So today's discussion is about the request for repairs. And let me find it. I just wanted to go through the detail of it, and I also want you to understand the implications when you agree to a request for repairs, because when doing so, you are agreeing to release various contingencies, and the various contingencies are pretty broad, as a matter of fact. So let's go through the request for repairs, and I'll address the other aspects in terms of what you're giving up when there is a conclusion about the repairs and or credits. So you can see the very beginning, it's just a date prepared, and it references the purchase contract. And you should always put the date of the purchase contract, the reference date, which is found in the top left-hand corner of the RPA. And then it's self-explanatory to insert the buyer's and the seller's names. And one thing I see quite often is under section 1A. Many times individuals don't check the box. So check the box. Let's not leave it to chance. So the beginning is that the buyer requests and check all that apply. Buyer requests that seller prior to final verification of condition, repair, or take the other specified action for each item listed below, or you can check the box and attach a list if you want. So in that section, you're going to just list out the repairs that you're requesting on behalf of your buyer. And then another thing I see often in purchase contracts, individuals will write in not just request that the seller pay for the termite inspection report, but maybe they'll also request that the seller provide a clearance. If you don't get that, then you're going to have a problem, as a matter of fact. And that's why when using, I always suggest using the request for repairs when requesting a termite clearance, because there's specific language in here that will protect the buyer. So in terms of section B1, if we have a report, we can just check the box and we can request that the buyer or the seller pay for section 1 work. Now, there is no obligation for the seller to pay for that. Yancey has a house he's selling right now, and the repairs are very extensive. So he wants to negotiate that, and that's very acceptable. Something else we talked about, I never suggest ever getting a second termite inspection report. It's likely that the scope of work is going to be different than the first report, and you have an obligation to disclose those reports to the buyer. Remember, those reports are on file with the state of California, so there's no hiding those reports. Now, it talks about in section B1, the date of the report, and you can, if you have the report, you can insert the name of the termite company. If, for example, any section 2 work that somebody may request is going to be a part of the request for repairs, check the box. It's rare we see that. That is not a mandate by a lender. And then if you're going to write this into the purchase contract to begin with when submitting an offer, the language found under section III should be inserted. And it reads, buyer requests either section 1 or section 2 work above, seller shall no later than 5 days prior to close of escrow deliver to buyer a written pest control certification showing the corrective work has been completed. So if you're going to just eliminate using the request for repairs, and when you're submitting the offer and you want the termite section 1 completed, and you want to include that in the purchase contract, then just take some of this language and insert that into the purchase contract. So you should say, seller shall no later than 5 days prior to close of escrow deliver to buyer a written pest control certification showing the work has been completed. So insert that language into the purchase contract, and that eliminates any question of whether or not a certification must be provided by the seller.
Rich, we have a question. Ruth is asking, do we need to provide a termite inspection done 6 months prior to escrow?
I think that's going to be discretionary on behalf of the buyer. I think a report is valid for 6 months. However, is the buyer going to say, I want a new report? So I think it's something that's just negotiable. I would give them the old reports, and if they're insisting on a new report, it's something you can agree to, or they can pay for their own inspection. So there's nothing that stops them from proceeding with performing a termite inspection at their discretion also. And then section C, 1C, why is this important? Buyer requests that seller credit buyer X amount of dollars at close of escrow. But the reference below that is very explicit. If there's a credit that's issued here, it is separate and distinct from any other credit that the buyer and seller may have negotiated. So in the purchase contract, if the parties agreed to credit the buyer $10,000 for closing costs, and we insert a credit here, it's going to be the total of both credits. So this does not supersede or offset any other credits that you negotiated. So it's cumulative. So keep that in mind.
Correct. In regards to what you just touched on, when someone writes in a credit for $4,000 here, and then they also make an addendum for $4,000, do they just have to reference on the addendum that it's an addendum to the request for response to, or to the request for repairs?
But the dilemma is, the reason most likely we're going to issue a separate addendum for credit is because we don't want the lender to see the request for repairs. So it's always a dilemma. If you do have the buyer's getting a loan and the buyer is requesting both a credit and that the seller complete repairs, the problem is going to be, because there's a credit and that credit is associated with this source document, the lender's going to be, they're going to request a copy of the request for repairs. So if they receive a request for repairs and there are deficiencies in the property, they're going to want all those repairs completed. So what I think we want to do, we may have to have a separate addendum if there's a credit that we want, because typically we don't want the lender to see the request for repairs that shows deficiencies in the property. So that would be the reason to have an addendum, Carlos. But if you reference the request for repairs, it's then going to put the lender on notice. So that's
how you would use an addendum is when you don't ask for repairs on the request for repairs form. You just ask.
You could just ask for a credit, right? Or you could submit a request for repairs and a separate addendum, separate documents.
So I'm noticing some agents that are doing both. Then I tell them, when you do two separate ones, you're requesting a credit on the request for repairs, and you're writing up an addendum for another $4,000. It almost makes it look like it's two separate credits.
It is. It is. You're right. It is. It'd be two separate credits, and the seller is going to be very unhappy if the listing agent allows that to happen. Does anyone have questions about to make sure that everybody is clear? Because it is very important, and we've witnessed the same thing Carlos is talking about, where there's a credit and a request for repairs and a credit and a separate addendum, but the intent is that the separate addendum is the total credit in lieu of any repairs. But sometimes it just hasn't been caught, so we don't want to be in that position. I'm sorry, what?
I came in late.
Yeah, did you miss something?
So then you would just put in credit for repairs as an addendum and then not put it out over here?
That's what I would do, right? I would probably have a discussion if there's a loan involved and you're going to be asking for repairs, right? Because there's going to be an addendum issued by escrow, an amendment, and the underlying document to that escrow amendment is going to be a request for repairs, because the lender is going to request both.
So you can still have your section 1 clearance out here and your other repairs mentioned?
Yes, yes. So if you want a combination of repairs and a credit, I suggest submitting the request for repairs and a separate addendum. And just say for closing costs. It could be that simple. If that's all you want it to say, as a matter of fact, is the lender will approve that. and just notify the listing agent, hey, this is how I'm going to negotiate the request for repairs. And this is the reason why. And they should be very happy that you're that astute that you're going to do it in that manner. And we don't see it very often, but now Section 3 FHA or VA. So when an FHA or VA appraisal is done, there can be deficiencies called out by the appraiser, and it may be repairs that the lender mandates those repairs be completed. And if the seller refuses to complete those repairs, it's going to cause the loan to fail, and the buyer could cancel based upon a loan contingency, assuming they haven't released the loan contingency. So two things, Section 3A, there could be repairs that the lender is demanding, and we would put that information in there. And then Section 3B, if there are costs that the lender is demanding the seller pay, then we would insert that accordingly there. We don't see too many FHA or VA loans around here. And then this is something that's very important to me. So Section 4, if seller agrees to all of buyer's requests or some of the buyer's requests and buyer accepts seller's partial agreement below, then buyer removes the investigation of property contingency. And I highlighted this in orange because I want you to see what's taking place if the parties agree to this request for repairs and what the buyer's giving up, just so you're fully aware. So let's just scan through that. If I were to look at the purchase contract, so the request for repairs is referencing a couple of sections. It's referencing Section 3L3. And then you can see that further references subsection 8C and 12. Let's go down to 8C. It's unfortunate it's not found all in one area for you to recognize exactly what contingencies are being removed. But now 8C references the investigation of property. So this agreement is, as specified in 3L3, contingent upon buyer's acceptance of the condition of and any other matters affecting the property. Then it references paragraph 12. And this is all going to be a part of the buyer's investigation. And that's why I want you to point this out, because I think there's a lot of confusion between the contingency associated with the seller's disclosures and the buyer's investigation contingency. I'll get down there eventually. So once again, this is the areas highlighted in orange specifically reference the buyer's investigation of property contingency. So you can see it talks about inspections, investigations, test surveys, and other studies. And that's not limited to physical inspections, right? So that's part of the investigation contingency. And that can actually also include a lead-based paint disclosure or inspection for any property built before 1978 is subject to a lead-based paint disclosure and inspection. And then also you can see in section 12B1C, it references wood destroying pests and organisms, a termite. That's what we're referencing here. And then the other aspect that's part of the buyer's investigation is section 12B2. And it's other than those that are specified as separate contingencies, right? And this includes availability of homeowners insurance, flood insurance, and fire insurance. That's all a part of the buyer's investigation contingency. And not that we want a transaction to fail because of homeowners insurance, but everybody probably is paying some form of insurance, and you can see just how high the premiums have become. Automotive, homeowners insurance, everything has gone up dramatically in the state. And that very well could cause a transaction to fail or could cause a buyer to not go forward. So they should be contacting their insurance company before they release the investigation contingency. And I'd say that's probably incumbent upon you to make sure early in the transaction that they are contacting their insurer to be sure that, first of all, they can get insurance because it could be in a high fire zone or a flood zone, and that could cause complications. Now, I'm not aware of any area specifically that's refusing to insure property, but I think if that's the case, the state of California provides the ability to obtain insurance through the state of California for those areas in which insurers are no longer providing insurance. Trabuco Canyon could be one of those areas, maybe. Mary said yes.
It is.
So Trabuco Canyon, there we go. I get lucky. That's an area in which most insurers are not going to provide coverage.
So how do you get from the state of California?
I forgot what the term is, but they do have policies available for those areas in which no private insurer is going to issue insurance.
That must be really expensive.
The cost? That's a good question.
Might have to be subsidized.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. It might be subsidized by you and your taxes. Unfortunately.
Is it coming from the homeless tax?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the homeless tax isn't helping us here because we've had, since last week, 4 Priuses parked out in the parking lot at nighttime. So be careful when you park down there. I've notified the building management that we have homeless people once again on the parking lot. So
Okay.
4 different vehicles are sleeping in the cars at night.
It's called the California Fair Plan.
Thank you. The California Fair Plan. Thank you.
And that applied to both Kodo and the Canyon.
Yeah, it will, unfortunately. You probably witnessed your homeowner's insurance going
Yeah.
up dramatically out there. And then when we're signing the request for repairs, let's go to this. This is the other aspect that falls under the buyer's investigation advisory. Hi, how are you? That's okay. So let's look at section 3A, just general inspections of the property, pool, so on and so forth. The square footage. Confirmation of square footage is not an appraisal contingency. It is an investigation contingency. Wood destroying pests, pest control, right? Soil stability, water and utilities, environmental hazards, earthquake, fire hazard, and other insurance, building permits, so on and so forth. Rental property restrictions, and that's becoming more and more prominent in security and safety. So knowing the neighborhood itself. So when you're agreeing to release the buyer's investigation contingency, you can see how broad the release is. Often the request for repairs or the seller's response may ask that the buyer release certain contingencies, that if I'm negotiating the request for repairs, I'm just going to accept the default and say the entire investigation contingency and not just a portion of it. But obviously, if you want something greater than that, you would need to attach the contingency removal form to the request for repairs. And if you do attach a contingency removal form to the request for repairs, it must be signed for it to be valid too, by all parties. So if you sign the request for repairs and there's an attached contingency removal form and it's not signed, the document's not complete.
Is it possible that seller doesn't accept the repairs?
All the time.
And if they don't, what would happen?
You continue on, or you cancel the transaction, or you accept the property as is.
Okay, so it's a choice.
It's a choice, exactly. And the document even states that the seller has no obligation to respond to the request for repairs.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Any questions about that? Okay, so we know under section 4A, if we accept the default, the investigation contingency, which is very broad, will be given up by the buyer if the parties agree. That's fine, nothing wrong with that. And then, or you can check the box for section 4A2, just removing specific contingencies if you would like. And then buyer releases seller from any loss, liability, expense, or cause of action regarding the disclosed condition of the property. So that doesn't mean anything about the undisclosed condition, which is usually the most important thing. And then expiration. So the request for repairs does expire. And it expires within 3 days after the date of the last buyer's signature. So keep that in mind. It doesn't hang out there forever. If the seller responds subsequent to the expiration date, it's a counteroffer per se. That's really what it comes down to. Or also, before the seller signs or agrees, the buyer can always withdraw their request. So you'd call them first and then send written notification that you're withdrawing the request for repairs. Because if the seller just accepts the request as presented and returns the document, and that's the key part, not just signing, but returning, then the buyer's given up their investigation contingency.
So you cannot submit an additional request for repair?
You can do anything you want.
Okay, because even if they sign it and then you realize there's something else that needs to be addressed.
You've given up. Well, first of all, you can't cancel based upon your investigation contingency. So you're lacking leverage over the seller if you do it that way. So that would be the key. Obviously, we want to be sure if there's something you may not be aware of it. And I guess in your question, if it's something that was disclosed through a third-party report, the buyer has no recourse. But if it's a disclosure made by the seller that's material in nature, that's not in a third-party report, regardless of who paid for that report, then that could open up the contingency or the rescission period for the buyer.
Yeah, because sometimes there's a structural inspection and, the deadline for your inspections coming to an end, but you haven't gotten your structural inspection before. And you can just put it in the request.
You know what you could do? You can release all contingencies and make that a contingency that you're not releasing.
So even if they accept this, you can still have.
Well, no, I'm saying that if they accept it and return it, then you're going to have a difficult time if you want something else.
We should wait for reports.
You should. You should actually, in my opinion, wait for the appraisal also, because there could be something that the appraiser's calling out.
Yeah, I had someone who was saying that when the appraisal report came in, the lot size was almost 2,000 smaller than what was mentioned in the property report, the property information and the title report, everything, but the appraisal came 2,000 short. And so they ended up negotiating almost 50,000 lower.
See, in that case, if the square footage of the lot or the structure is lower than the buyer expected or thought or was led to believe, remember, you can't cancel based upon the appraisal contingency.
Yeah.
That's the investigation contingency. So that's something you'd be giving up. That's a really good point, because square footage sometimes becomes an issue.
So you can cancel anytime based on that?
No, you cannot. If you
cannot.
release the investigation contingency and you find out subsequently that the square footage of the house is 4,000 and not 5,000, you can't cancel based upon the investigation contingency. Or you can't cancel based upon the square footage because you've already given up the investigation contingency. So the square footage is a part of the investigation contingency, not the appraisal contingency. The appraisal contingency is just simply the opinion of value. So if it comes in at or above the purchase price, can't cancel. Lower than, you can't. That's the whole purpose in regards to the appraisal contingency itself. Any questions about that? Okay, answer is no.
So it's a choice really. Seller can agree with some of it and just say, I give you a credit for a couple of
You
months.
can do that, right? You can do that. Or you can say, I don't want to give you anything because the market's so competitive, or I'm going to do whatever I can for you.
Nice.
But something that was pointed out to me just yesterday, it was a good reminder. I think our goal is to close transactions. So we're not here to get in a fight. Let's work with everybody, be happy, right? You're at inspections, point out how good things are to your buyer if you're representing a buyer. And then if you're the seller, the listing agent, there's no reason to get into a discussion or pass on anything negative to your client. Work that out. We're here to close transactions. It's the only way we make money. And we want people to be happy, more importantly, so they continue to come back to us. No, you can also, this is not a good term. You're more likely to manipulate the transaction in a favorable manner for you, right? I said that was a bad choice of words.
Sorry, I put it on it.
And then section D, expiration of seller's partial or conditional agreement. If for any reason the seller hasn't, the seller's response is going to be conditional, and also there's going to be a time frame in which it will expire. And it gives the buyer an opportunity to cancel the transaction before the seller responds. Keep that in mind. And then let's assume that the seller does not agree, or they agree partially to our requests. Then under the very last section, buyer response to seller, partial conditional agreement. Then the buyer can say they accept the partial conditional agreement, or I don't accept any of it at all. Sign it and start over again with request for repair number 2. Okay. And then let's assume that the seller responds. So there's some similarities between this form and and request for repairs also. And you can see under section 1, if we check the box, that the seller could say that they agree to all of the buyer's requests except, or B, at the close of escrow to credit the buyer, or we can modify the purchase agreement or others, right? And there's a reminder, if there's a credit issued here, it's in addition to any other credits that were negotiated outside of the request for repairs. And then also, let's assume we come to an agreement. You can see under section 2, the seller's agreement only applies if buyer removes the investigation contingency. And we talked about the scope of the investigation contingency. So that's very, very important that you keep that in mind. You want to ask something?
How long a person has a time to fix everything? For them?
The obligation contractually is 5 days before the close of escrow.
Okay, so
That is the
5
time in which the repairs are to be completed. And then you can see further down, the buyer can accept and then, or they can just not agree. So there's something else I wanted to review because we talked about the investigation contingency, but also I thought it was important that we go over what the seller's delivery of document contingency consists of. It's very important in my opinion. The screen is moving slow. So in the purchase contract, and the reason I'm going over this, I want to help everybody understand the difference between the investigation contingency and the contingency associated with the seller's disclosures or review of seller documents. So you can see under section 3L4, I've got it highlighted in yellow, review of seller documents. So there's a 17-day time frame for a contingency. Now, what does the review of the seller's documents consist of? It's pretty broad, as a matter of fact. Now, review of seller's documents, I think I went too far. All right, so first of all, remember, the seller's delivery of documents, the seller had 7 days following acceptance to deliver all of the seller's disclosures. And remember, the contingency period is going to be equal to whatever the default contingency period is. In this case, it's 17 days, or the greater of, if we compare that to 5 days following receipt of the seller's disclosures. So let's say, for example, on day 14, the seller delivers their disclosures to me. I have actually 5 more days after that to remove my contingencies as the buyer. So it's going to be the greater of 5 days following receipt of the disclosures or the 17-day time frame found in the purchase contract. So the default time frame for virtually all contingencies, most 17 days. So if the seller delivers the documents, the required seller documents to me beyond the first 7 days, I may actually have a greater contingency period to work with. And then there's no obligation for a buyer to remove contingencies unless the seller has delivered all disclosures. So the seller's disclosures begin under section 3Q1, the NHD report. If we were to have a pest control report in there, you could say I inserted that in section Q2. And then Q5, government required point of sale inspections and reports. Newport Beach has one. City of Laguna Beach has one also, for example. So those are all obligations of the seller to comply and deliver all of those reports within the first 7 days following acceptance.
What is that?
What's that?
The government, what kind of?
So in the city of Newport Beach, there's a mandatory city inspection that's required.
So someone from city.
The city must go out there, or you can have the luxury of just paying a fee to waive the inspection. In city of Laguna Beach, there's a real property report that's required to be delivered to the buyer by the seller.
So when they come from city, what do they investigate?
Safety hazards, things like that. The ideal situation is to
So
not
just
have
the
them out.
safety.
Typically, they're going to be on the outside of the property. What they're looking for from day to day, that's a good question. Could change. Obviously, if you're representing the buyer, I think you should probably have the inspection and not agree to the waiver by just simply paying the fee. And if the buyer doesn't want to go forward with the inspection, then we're going to have them sign something that they're waiving the right to the inspection. Likewise, if they refuse to have a physical inspection of the property, we're going to have them sign a waiver indicating that we recommended that they have an inspection performed and they're acting against our advice.
I had a client that she brought the inspector from someone that she knew. Still, I need to, it wasn't really like someone that has a license for inspection, but someone that knew about the construction, had his own company. So do I still, in that case, to
This is the buyer. Yes, the buyer has the opportunity to choose anyone they want. Remember, even then, inspectors are not licensed. They're a member of organizations, nothing more than that in certain cases, but they're not licensed.
Nice.
There could be someone who's licensed as a contractor, but for the most part, I think most of them are not.
Under the seller documents, would that include HOAs and CNRs?
That's going to be a separate
That's separate.
contingency, right? That's called out. I'm going to go through the actual documents, but I think that's a very good question. If you look at the contingency removal form, and I'll pull that up, it's called out separately from the seller's disclosures. So in terms of the seller's documents that are to be delivered, leased or lien items and systems, what's common now, solar panels. So you obviously want to have the disclosure delivered to them in regards to the solar panels. And there's a CAR form if you can't get the actual underlying documents initially, so the seller can disclose as much as they know to the buyer about the solar panels themselves, costs, rental rates, so on and so forth. And then we talk about inspections, reports, tests, and certificates. This all falls under the seller disclosures. And the seller disclosures are very comprehensive. So statutory and other disclosures, including lead-based paint and cancellation rights. So what's included in seller disclosures? The TDS, transfer disclosure statement. And remember, the TDS is not considered complete unless the agent also completes their inspection. So that means signing page 3 of the TDS or attaching your AVID if there's going to be an AVID. We require that you complete an AVID. So delivery will be complete when the TDS and AVID are sent to the buyer. Other things, for example, because contractually, if a TDS is required, the seller property questionnaire is required. Seller property questionnaire has disclosures in it that are statutorily required, ordinance, for example. So if a TDS is required, a seller property questionnaire is required. So those are seller documents. If a TDS is not required, then the exempt seller disclosure is required. So delivery of that is required, right? Then other things such as delivery of the Melrose Community Facilities Act, so information about that. And then also what I think is very confusing, whether or not the property is at a high or very high fire hazard zone. And it's broken out into 2 separate aspects, and that would be Form FHDS. I'm going to go over that. And then lead disclosures, if the property is pre-1978, that's another seller mandatory delivered disclosure. CAR form LPD, lead disclosures. And then home fire hardening disclosure and defensible space disclosure. Form FHDS addresses both of those. So for example, if for some reason the property does not meet any of those requirements and it doesn't fall into a high fire zone, if there's a TDS or a TDS is not required, then theoretically there's nothing for the seller to disclose. But on the form FHDS, if that's the case, if there's nothing to disclose, then you have the seller sign it and have the buyer sign it, return it, because it acknowledges that we have provided them with the information that we're aware of. So that's very important that you do that. And then if it's a pre-1960 property, the residential earthquake risk disclosure statement also would be required. So those all fall within the seller disclosures.
Where can you get all these disclosures, like home fire and
Well, for example, the FHCS is a part of your SIP forms library, but the NHD report is going to tell you if it's in a high or very high fire zone. It's going to tell you that. It's easy to read. They're just check boxes, as a matter of fact.
Where did you say? Where did you-
And the natural hazard disclosure.
Mhm.
So that's where you'll find out whether the property is or is not located in a high or very high fire zone.
And where can you find that for?
You'll typically escrow is going to accommodate you by ordering the
Okay.
NHD report.
Richard, if it's in high risk of fire
Uh-huh.
and insurance doesn't cover that, but you cannot buy insurance for that particular house. The still buyer has the option to buy it, right? You take the risk and buy the house from the seller, right?
Well, if they're getting a loan, the lender's not going to close a transaction unless there is insurance.
Unless you buy cash.
But there is an option through the state. And what was the name of that program again?
California Fair. Hold on one second. Fair Plan.
California Fair Plan. If they
Yes.
can't get insurance, that is the final option in terms of somebody who can't find insurance.
And some people also who have major carriers, when they've seen huge upticks in pricing, they'll actually do their fire with these guys.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's discretionary
Right,
if you wish to go there.
right.
California Fair Plan, you see?
Yes, yeah.
So that's the insurance for people that they cannot get an insurance.
Cannot, or maybe the premiums are so high, it could be an alternative for them.
Oh.
So if you have like farmers, you would just do the other homeowners, just the basic with farmers, and then you would take the fire portion and go to Fair Plan.
So it costs less.
Ideally,
Ideally,
Yeah.
yeah. That's what insurance brokers are utilizing right now too. Those, so they're selling like a basic policy without fire, and then they're sending their customers to the Fair Plan.
all right, to get that additional coverage.
And the last one I closed out here in the fire hazard area was $6,000 for the premium,
For the total policy or just for the fire portion?
just for the fire portion,
Just for the fire portion.
just for the fire portion.
Yeah, Rich, I did one in Fallbrook. And San
Yeah.
Diego, North San Diego County, that whole area is all considered fire.
Fire
though
hazard
had it.
area.
And you have to have the fair plan, which I think cost my clients between $4,000 and $5,000. Plus, you had to have a regular homeowner's insurance that covered like your contents. So it was
Right.
between $5,000 and $6,000 for the entire annual policy for it.
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
The internet tells me 3,200 is the average on fair.
So Brian just said the internet said the average on the fair housing plan is 3,200. But we know. Is the state of California publishing that information? Just curious. Policy genius, so.
Richard, even though 1960s, prior 1960s homes,
Uh-huh.
it needs to be kind of regulation, it is certified for loan. If you don't get those kind of certified, you cannot get loan immediately, right?
Well, there's in Los Angeles, there's a 9A report and it talks about aspects associated with earthquake hazards. But in Orange County, there's no issue. It's just a matter of disclosing it. And the information that you're aware of actually as to the house.
But the
itself.
houses that owned by the beach, all beach
Yeah,
front,
yeah.
because they built long time ago, sometimes 60s. That's why they are more sensitive to those homes to be physically.
Well, I think it's just construction standards before
More regulation.
1960 were far different. And so you're more likely to, because the framing was not bolted to the slab. So that's probably one of the biggest reasons why. But in that case, it's just an obligation of the seller to disclose it. And of course, can you get insurance? When you're that close to the beach, like down in Capistrano with the waves hitting your house, that's a good question.
And I heard that entry room to room is small, narrow. You have to fix that too, right?
No, there's no
Only
obligation
if
to
they
do
make it
that.
Narrow.
Yeah, shouldn't matter.
Okay.
Shouldn't
So
matter.
Rich, Ruth is saying that if, check with your buyer, see if they're military, because the military will do the insurance for them.
Oh, yeah. So if it's somebody of the military, or is that even for retirees?
They said that anyone that's been in the military or the veterans or reserves. Maybe John would have thought that.
Can you
Any-
repeat, please? I did not hear that.
So Ruth is telling us that if you're a member of the military or the reserves or probably retired, you may be able to get insurance through government assistance. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but it's possible the VA may
Yeah,
provide
they
some
might
type of,
have something. I mean, they have medical.
yeah,
right?
they may
You know,
provide
they
some
have
type of assurance.
USAA, that's insurance that sometimes they don't.
Yeah, I've seen that on television, right? I have. Anyone else? Let's see. Okay. And then finally, so we've gone over. I hear people yawning. I'm not going to take that personally. You think when I'm reading this is exciting for me?
Preparing for it.
It's not. So we've gone over two things today. We've gone over the investigation contingency, which now you should have a better understanding of what that encompasses. And then section D in yellow, review of seller documents and all the documents that fall within that contingency itself. So if you're giving up, if we check box 2C1, you can see exactly what we're giving up. Now, Shweta had an example before in which she wanted to exempt something. There was something on the appraisal or that she wanted to exempt. You can release all, you can even create a contingency here for that one remaining item that's of concern to you. Then you can see, review the seller documents. Everything, if we check the box for section 2C and 2D1, 2C1 and 2D1, we're giving up most of our ability to cancel this transaction. And then before, you also had, Yancy, you had a question about common interest disclosures. As you can see, the common interest disclosures is a separate contingency. But the two biggest ones are the seller disclosures and the investigation of the property contingency. And remember, the seller disclosures, upon delivery of those statutorily required disclosures, for example, the TDS, the fire hazard report or disclosure, that actually following delivery, even if you removed your contingencies, opens up the rescission period. So if you're a listing agent, that's why it's so critical to have all of those seller disclosures delivered as soon as you can. So the rescission period doesn't continue on. So let's say, for example, your seller refuses to sign a TDS up through the close of escrow, a buyer can cancel because the seller did not deliver a TDS, assuming one is required. Does anyone have any questions?
That's why some agents, they get all the documents.
Up front, correct. Right. Another question comes up. When the disclosures are signed maybe 2 months ago, are they still valid? They are. If something has changed, the seller will have an obligation to notify the buyer. But just because they're dated 2 months prior to the date that escrow opens, using that as an example is meaningless unless the condition has changed. Any questions? Nope. Okay. So next week, Halloween, right? Costumes required. What time? At 12 o'clock. Stay as late as you want. 12 o'clock, right? So drinks, food. So I hope everybody comes. What?
Margaritas.
Margaritas, right? Anyone has any special requests, let us know.
Fine.
What'd you say?
She said wine.
Wine, okay. Right.
Red
Tell,
or white?
tell us what you want, right? There's gonna be a limit, Shweta. I'm not gonna.
Okay.
And I am certainly not a wine connoisseur, so I wouldn't know what to choose anyways. Okay. So we'll let you know about hopefully the presentation we're trying to get Sarah Almelesa's general counsel to put on for us in regards to the impending litigation regarding commissions. I'll keep you apprised of that. All right. Okay. Thanks for coming, everybody. Woo!
Thank you. See ya.
Hey, Mary, how are you?
Good morning.
How are you?
Thank you for.
Fair plan, California Fair Plan.
Nothing if not considered.
No. I think even.